Gather close, wanderers, and heed an old man's tale. This scarred hand has held cursed relics. These eyes have witnessed whispers from the void. Tonight, I unfold another secret from my leather-bound journal, where ordinary objects breathe with extraordinary terrors. Light your candle and pray it doesn't flicker.
Tonight's relic. A grandfather clock that didn't just mark time, it judged the unseen. You feel the weight of polished oak, smell the tang of ozone and old whale oil, hear the relentless tick-tock echoing like a spider knitting stopwatches in the dark. You might not survive this one, or at least your sleep won't. We're in 1851 London. Fog clings to the Thames like rotten lace, gas lamps hiss, and beneath it all thrums the desperate heartbeat of an era obsessed with progress and ghosts. Enter Phineas Mortlake. Picture a man with eyes like over-polished buttons and fingers permanently stained with clock oil. His workshop? A cathedral of chaos, brass gears whispering on shelves, pendulum bobs swinging like metallic tears, and half-assembled chronometers littering every surface like skeletons of devoured time. Mortlake wasn't just building clocks, he was stitching together the fabric of reality and the void. His grief was the blueprint. 2 years prior, his daughter Alara vanished from their Mayfair home without a trace. No note, no struggle, just silence. The police chalked it up to a tragic accident or perhaps abduction. Mortlake, he became convinced her presence lingered. He needed proof, not faith, physics. So, the Mortlake chronovisor was born. Forget simple hour hands. This monstrosity boasted twin mercury-filled glass globes suspended above the dial, humming with a faint electrical charge, a trick borrowed from those newfangled telegraph experiments. The theory, spirits being ectoplasmic party crashers, supposedly disrupted electromagnetic fields. Mercury, sensitive and shivery, would ripple at their approach. But Mortlake went further. He integrated a mesmerism-inspired mechanism, a delicate, hair-thin filament of silver wire running through the pendulum shaft. If the mercury and the filament reacted simultaneously, the clock's intricate escapement would lock, the hands would freeze, time for that phantom moment would cease. Tick, and then nothing. Imagine explaining that down the pub. "Oi, Phineas, does your clock tell the hour or give ghosts a parking ticket?" Mortlake debuted his creation at the 1851 Great Exhibition, that glorious Crystal Palace showcase of steam engines and stuffed exotic birds. Nestled between a hydraulic loom and a display of Prussian pickles, the chronovisor looked utterly out of place, like a gargoyle at a garden party. Visitors gawked, scientists scoffed. One particularly pompous fellow from the Royal Society declared it mechanized melancholia. But Mortlake didn't care. He stood sentinel beside his clock, eyes scanning the crowd, not for admiration, but for that telltale stillness. It happened once. A dowager duchess, swathed in black crepe enough to shroud a cathedral, paused before it. The mercury shivered like a frightened pond, the silver filament glowed faintly blue, and the second hand stuttered, just for a heartbeat, then resumed. The duchess felt a chill, blamed a draft. Mortlake, he saw validation. His grief had built a bridge. The chronovisor wasn't just measuring seconds, it was listening for sighs in the silence. Historians still argue whether Mortlake was a grieving genius or a man driven mad by loss, building a machine to quantify his sorrow. But that single, almost imperceptible hesitation of the clock's hand, that's the whisper we begin with. That tiny fracture in reality, echoing across a century. You lean closer to the journal's page now, the candlelight pooling around the sketch of that impossible clock. Its face stares back, empty, waiting. The hands, frozen in the drawing. Or are they?
You watch Phineas Mortlake retreat from the great exhibition's glare, his precious chronovisor carefully crated, the phantom whisper at the Crystal Palace replaying in his mind. He doesn't head home to Mayfair's respectable squares. No wanderer. He descends into his real sanctuary, the basement workshop beneath his townhouse. The air here tastes like metal filings and desperation. Imagine walls papered in diagrams of electromagnetic fields overlapping seance reports. Pinned butterflies replaced by sketches of ectoplasmic wisps. His workbench groans under mercury flasks, Leyden jars humming with stolen static, and coils of silver wire finer than a spider's sigh. This isn't just a workshop, it's a seance circle, conducted with screwdrivers. Mortlake's obsession isn't born of idle curiosity, it's carved from pure, raw grief. Remember Ilara. 8 years old, vanished while chasing a hoop in Hyde Park. One moment laughter ringing like a tiny bell, the next empty grass. The official verdict, a tragic accident, perhaps swallowed by the serpentine. But Mortlake knew. He felt the lingering chill in her empty bedroom, the phantom brush against his cheek at dawn. Victorian London offered little solace. Its answer to loss was ritualized mourning, jet-black crepe, memento mori jewelry woven from the dead's hair, even post-mortem photographs where departed children were propped up, eyes painted open for one last family portrait. You'd think this culture embraced ghosts, right? Wrong. It was terrified of them. All that black fabric, a desperate shield against the unseen. Mortlake rejected the shield. He wanted the sword, the scalpel, the proof. So the chronovisor evolved. He replaced the exhibition model's simple mercury globes with twin fist-size reservoirs of quicksilver, suspended in intricate brass cages charged by a hand-cranked electrostatic generator. Think of it as a Victorian ghost Geiger counter. But here's the obscure twist, the kind that makes historians giggle nervously. Mortlake incorporated a strand of Ilara's hair. He'd sealed it inside a hollow glass rod running through the heart of the pendulum. His logic, a sympathetic resonance. If her spirit neared, the hair would vibrate, completing a circuit that amplified the mercury's disturbance. It was part galvanic reaction, part wild parental hope, and entirely unproven physics. You have to admire the audacity, or maybe the madness. Historians still argue whether Mortlake was pioneering paranormal instrumentation or building the world's most heartbreaking mood ring. The workshop became his world. He ignored the growing pile of unpaid bills. Clockmaking for ghosts isn't exactly lucrative. He barely ate, surviving on strong tea and the ozone tang of his experiments. Outside, London was descending into the chaos of the great stink of
1858, the Thames basically a boiling sewer, Parliament draping curtains soaked in chloride of lime to survive the miasma. Inside Mortlake's basement, a different kind of miasma swirled. He dimmed the gas lamps, cranked the generator until the air crackled, and watched the chronovisor. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Hours bled into days. He'd talk to it, whisper Ilara's name, plead for a sign. The silence of the mechanism became a physical ache. Then, a rain-lashed Tuesday night, it happened. He'd fallen asleep, slumped at his bench, head resting on a blueprint for a spirit resonance amplifier. A sudden, sharp crack jolted him awake, not thunder, glass. One of the mercury reservoirs had fractured, a silver bead escaping to roll across the floor like a terrified living thing. The pendulum hung skewed, frozen mid-swing. And the hands were stopped. 3:17 a.m. Mortlake's breath hitched. He scanned the shadowed workshop. Nothing, just the frantic drumming of rain on the high basement window. But the air, it felt thick, charged, and cold. A localized frost seemed to bloom on the fractured glass reservoir. Had Ilara visited, or something else? The rational part of his mind screamed structural failure, mercury contraction. The grieving father's heart, it soared. Proof. Painful, terrifying proof. He didn't repair the fracture. He framed it in brass, a jagged scar on his creation, a permanent testament to the moment the impossible touched his world. He started wearing Ilara's tiny coral necklace tucked under his shirt. London outside might be drowning in sewage, but Phineas Mortlake was chasing whispers in a mercury-scented void. The chronovisor wasn't just a detector anymore. It was his confessional. And the ghosts, it seemed, were starting to answer. Forget the Ripper stalking Whitechapel. The real terror for Mortlake was the quiet stop of a clock hand in the dead of night, confirming the dead are never truly gone. They're just waiting for the right machine to listen.
You stand with Mortlake over the fractured chronovisor, smelling the shop tang of spilled mercury and cold terror. His fingers tremble, not from fear, but frantic purpose. That frozen pendulum wasn't an end, it was a catalyst. Now, Wanderer, you peer into the how. Forget elegant timekeeping, this is ghost hunting with gears. Imagine a cathedral clock mated with a lightning storm and a mesmerist's parlor trick. That's the chronovisor's beating, unnerving heart. First, the mercury. Mortlake replaces the broken reservoir with twin heavier glass orbs, each holding a pound of quicksilver. They're suspended not on simple wires, but within cages of electrified brass filaments, fed by a hand-cranked Wimshurst machine, a thing of spinning glass discs and snapping sparks straight out of a mad scientist's daydream. The theory? Spirits are energy thieves, see? Draining ambient electromagnetic fields like spectral mosquitoes. Mortlake's mercury is his canary in the coal mine. If a phantom drifts near, it disrupts the field, making the mercury shiver. Picture it, a silvery ripple in the glass like a pond touched by an invisible stone. Quaint? Sure. But here's the obscure, slightly ridiculous fact. Victorians believed mercury could trap souls. Alchemists used it in attempts to create homunculi. Mortlake, he just wanted it to flinch reliably. More sensitive than a society matron's sniff at a fishmonger's stall, he muttered once. Dark humor, fueled by darker hope. Then the mesmerism angle. Franz Mesmer's animal magnetism theory was still rattling around Victorian parlors like a bad smell. Mortlake latched on to the idea of ethereal fluids connecting all things. Enter the silver filament, a strand thinner than a human hair running through the pendulum rod. It wasn't just wire, it was Ilara's hair, sealed in quartz. Alongside it, soaked in zinc sulfate solution, a concoction mesmerists claimed amplified spiritual resonance. This filament hummed with a low current. If the mercury shivered and this hair-thin wire registered a sympathetic vibration, clunk. A tiny, spring-loaded latch, hidden in the clock's movement, would engage, jamming the escapement wheel. The heartbeat of the clock, that relentless tick-tock, would simply cease. Historians still argue whether mesmerism was early hypnotism, pure quackery, or a misunderstood glimpse into bioelectric fields. Mortlake didn't care. He blended it with galvanic principles like a desperate bartender mixing dubious spirits. His clock didn't just detect, it conversed in a language of shivers and sparks. Imagine explaining that to a modern electrician. So, the ghost trips the mercury motion sensor, which talks to the dead girl hair antenna, which then throws a mechanical tantrum and stops the whole show. They'd check you for mercury poisoning. And the escapement itself. Normally, this is the precise mechanism regulating a clock's beat. Mortlake perverted it. He designed a sensitive release, a delicate brass armature balanced on a knife-edge pivot, held in check by the faintest pressure from the vibrating filament. A strong enough spectral nudge, the armature slips. A counterweight drops. A hook engages. Silence. It was less engineering, more Rube Goldberg device for the departed, all while the whole contraption sat inside an oak case lined with sheets of vulcanized rubber, freshly patented by Charles Goodyear no less, because obviously ghosts hate static cling. You run a finger along the cold oak casing in your mind, feeling the absurd audacity of it. This wasn't just a machine built to find phantoms. It was a monument to a father's grief hammered together with Victorian pseudoscience and a terrifying willingness to believe that the coldest thing in the room wasn't the mercury, but the void it tried to measure. The chronovisor didn't tell time. It waited for time to flinch. And in that flinch, Mortlake saw a ghost. Or perhaps just the reflection of his own breaking heart amplified through a labyrinth of brass and desperation.
The chronovisor's cracked reservoir is now a badge of honor for Mortlake, a jagged scar whispering of the basement's cold visitation. But proof demands an audience. Science demands replication. So you watch as Mortlake hauls his monstrous creation out of the workshop's ozone gloom and into the gilded cage of Mayfair. His patron? Lady Beatrice Chadwick, a widow drowning in black bombazine and desperate for any connection to her late admiral husband, lost at sea. Her townhouse reeks of beeswax, hothouse lilies, and quiet, expensive despair. The chronovisor is installed in the music room, a space of pale silk walls and a grand piano that hasn't been played since the Admiral's last birthday. It looks profoundly alien there, less a timepiece, more a captured beast from a brass and glass menagerie, its mercury globes catching the gaslight like malevolent eyes. This is London, 1888. Outside Lady Chadwick's velvet-draped windows, the fog isn't just atmospheric, it's thick with panic.
Jack the Ripper stalks Whitechapel, his unseen knife carving terror into the city's underbelly. Newspapers scream lurid headlines, seances multiply like anxious fungi, and the air thrums with a palpable dread of the unseen killer, and perhaps the unseen dead. The chronovisor arrives into this perfect storm. It's no longer Mortlake's private obsession. It becomes society's new macabre toy. Lady Chadwick hosts the first chronovisor soiree. Picture it: men in stiff collars clutching brandy, women in rustling taffeta, all pretending nonchalance, while their eyes dart constantly towards the oak and glass monstrosity ticking solemnly in the corner. Mortlake stands beside it, a gaunt, oil-stained specter amidst the perfumed throng, explaining the mercury, the filament, the locking mechanism. His voice is flat, devoid of showmanship. He doesn't offer ghost stories, he offers mechanics. The effect is chilling. So, Lady Fitzhugh, does one simply stand near it to attract a spirit, or must one expire first, asking for a friend? Nervous titters ripple through the room. Mortlake ignores the jibe, his gaze fixed on the steady swing of the pendulum. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The soirees become a grim fixture. It's the season's most dangerous parlor game. Guests compete to stand closest to the chronovisor, daring it to react. Wagers are placed, discreetly of course, in leather betting books. 5 guineas says it stops before the lobster patties are served. Mortlake endures it, his jaw clenched. He needs witnesses, even frivolous ones. He needs the chronovisor to prove itself beyond the confines of his grief-stricken basement. Lady Chadwick, meanwhile, basks in the scandalous attention. Her music room becomes the epicenter of spectral chic. Forget trivial gossip. The real currency is who felt the chill near the clock, who saw the mercury definitely quiver. The obscure, darkly humorous fact, wealthy Victorians were obsessed with novelty health devices, electrical belts, magnetic corsets, inhalers for nerve vapors. The chronovisor to them becomes the ultimate accessory, a soul detector. Darling simply must have Mortlake's contraption for the country house. The damp in the east wing is frightful, probably teeming with ancestral specters, needs cataloguing. Historians still argue whether this craze stemmed from genuine spiritualist belief or was merely a morbid fad fueled by Ripper-fueled hysteria and aristocratic boredom. Was it faith or fashionable dread? Then it happens. Not in the quiet dead of night, but amidst the clink of crystal and the drone of a string quartet sawing through something somber. A portly industrialist, Sir Reginald Pike, is holding forth loudly near the chronovisor, booming about his new steam turbine. He gestures expansively, his elbow accidentally nudging a potted fern. A cascade of soil spills on the Persian rug. Laughter erupts, and in that moment of boisterous distraction, the chronovisor stops. The sound is jarring, not a chime, not a crash, just the sudden, profound absence of the tick-tock. The music falters, conversations die mid-sentence, every head turns, the second hand is frozen. The mercury in the left globe isn't just shivering, it's churning violently, like a miniature silver storm. The delicate silver filament inside the pendulum shaft glows with an eerie, sustained blue-white light. Mortlake moves first, pushing past a startled footman. He stares, not at the guests, but at the space just behind Sir Reginald, where the spilled earth lies dark on the rug. His face is bone white.
Something is here, he whispers, the words slicing the silence. Lady Chadwick lets out a muffled shriek, clutching her pearls. Sir Reginald, suddenly less florid, stumbles backward, knocking over a small Sheraton table. A ripple of pure, unadulterated fear washes through the perfumed room. The Ripper might be in Whitechapel, but here, in Mayfair's heart, the chronovisor has declared the presence of the void. The game just became terrifyingly real. You feel the collective breath held, the candle flames seeming to shrink away from the clock's cold, accusing stillness. The laughter is gone. Only the silent scream of the frozen hands remains.
The silence left by the chronovisor's abrupt halt hangs thick as the Mayfair fog, choking the laughter and clinking glasses into stunned immobility. You feel it too, Wanderer, that visceral lurch in the pit of your stomach. 1 second, Sir Reginald Pike's booming voice and spilled fern soil. The next, a pocket of absolute, unnatural quiet radiating from the frozen clock. Lady Chadwick's shriek is the first sound to pierce it, sharp as broken crystal. Guests recoil as if the stillness itself is contagious. Mortlake remains statue still before his creation, eyes wide, not with fear, but with a terrifying, hungry intensity. Proof, tangible, undeniable proof, witnessed by dozens. But chaos quickly replaces awe. Footmen are summoned, brandy splashed into trembling hands. Sir Reginald, florid face now ashen, demands to know what infernal trickery this is. Accusations fly like shrapnel. Mortlake is a fraud. The clock is rigged. Lady Chadwick's music room is haunted. Within the hour, whispers slither through London's elite drawing rooms faster than the Ripper's blade through Whitechapel alleyways. The Chadwick chronovisor incident becomes the scandal of the season, far juicier than any illicit affair. Mortlake, far from being hailed, finds himself besieged, not by scientists, but by terrified aristocrats demanding he remove his ghost trap from their premises immediately, and by opportunistic spiritualists offering him exorbitant sums to demonstrate his device at their next ectoplasmic extravaganza. He refuses them all, retreating back to his basement, the chronovisor now a heavier burden than ever. Proof, it seemed, was a double-edged sword. Enter Inspector Alastair Thorne. Picture him, late 40s, built like a sturdy oak wardrobe, eyes the color of Thames mud after a hard rain, and possessing a skepticism as thick as his Dundreary whiskers. He doesn't arrive at Mortlake's door because of ghosts. Scotland Yard has bigger, bloodier fish to fry, with Saucy Jack eviscerating women in the East End. No, Thorne is investigating a string of baffling high society burglaries. Valuables vanishing from locked rooms, diamond brooches, gold snuff boxes, rare porcelain, with no sign of forced entry, no witnesses, no trace, like smoke. The connection? A curious pattern emerges from Thorne's meticulous notes, cross-referenced with society gossip columns. Several victims had recently hosted or attended a chronovisor demonstration. Lady Chadwick herself reported a missing emerald pendant the very morning after her infamous soirée. Thorne isn't a man who believes in specters pilfering pearls. He believes in locks, alibis, and human greed. The obscure, almost forgotten fact? Victorian detectives were pioneers in forensic footprint analysis, meticulously casting impressions in plaster of Paris. Thorn had plaster dust permanently ingrained under his nails. He saw patterns where others saw chaos, and the pattern here pointed squarely at Phineas Mortlake. The clock was a perfect distraction, a macabre spectacle to cover mundane larceny. Who better positioned to case a wealthy home than the eccentric inventor invited in with his bizarre machine? Thorn imagines Mortlake noting window catches, memorizing the layout of a silver closet, while his audience stares, terrified at the mercury globes. A chillingly practical ruse. So Thorn descends into Mortlake's basement workshop, ducking under low beams, thick with cobwebs and the smell of ozone and despair. He finds the horologist hunched over the chronovisor, a magnifying glass screwed into one eye, delicately adjusting the electrified filament cage around a mercury globe. The clock ticks with a loud, almost defiant rhythm now. Thorn's presence is an intrusion of harsh reality, the scent of damp wool and pipe smoke cutting through the workshop's metallic tang. Mortlake, Thorn's voice is a gravelly rumble, devoid of preamble. Mr. Mortlake, Inspector Thorn, Scotland Yard. We need to discuss your apparatus and its curious habit of coinciding with the disappearance of valuable property. Mortlake looks up, his eyes hollow with exhaustion, but burning with a fervent light. Coinciding, Inspector, or detecting. The energies disturbed by a criminal act, a violation of sanctuary, might register similarly to a spectral presence. The chronovisor doesn't discriminate between types of trespass. His voice is calm, reasoned, chilling in its conviction. Thorn scoffs, a dry sound like stones grinding. Energies, sir. Trespass. I deal in broken locks and stolen goods, not ectoplasmic disturbances. Your clock stopped at Lady Chadwick's. Her pendant vanished that night. It stopped during a demonstration at Lord Wexley's country estate. 2 days later, a pair of Georgian candlesticks walked off. Pattern, Mr. Mortlake. Simple, earthly pattern. He taps his leather-bound notebook. Historians might one day argue whether you were a grieving genius or a charlatan, but right now I need to know if you're also a thief, or if your ghost detector is simply a convenient smokescreen for someone else. Mortlake stares at the frozen pendulum drawing Thorn had brought as evidence, a sketch from the Chadwick soiree. The hands stopped at 9:48 p.m. His gaze shifts to the chronovisor's now moving hands. The void leaves echoes, Inspector, he murmurs, almost to himself. Whether it's the echo of a departed soul or the lingering stain of a crime. He meets Thorn's skeptical gaze. I build clocks to measure the immeasurable. I don't steal snuff boxes. But if my machine marks the passage of evil as well as spirits, what does that say about the world we inhabit? The question hangs in the ozone-thick air, unanswered. Thorn sees no guilt in Mortlake's eyes, only a terrifying, absolute belief, and that, perhaps, is more unnerving than any confession. The Ripper's shadow might dominate the headlines, but in this basement, a different kind of hunt begins, one where the prey could be mortal greed, immortal malice, or the terrifying possibility that Mortlake's impossible clock was right all along. The frozen hands weren't just marking a ghost. They might have been pointing towards a thief hiding in plain sight, cloaked by society's fear of the dark.
Thorn's skepticism hangs like cheap wallpaper in Mortlake's workshop, peeling at the edges but stubbornly present. The inspector leaves, taking his earthly concerns about stolen snuff boxes with him, but the phantom idea lingers. Could the chronovisor be detecting crime instead of spirits? Mortlake dismisses it. The void, he believes, has a singular signature, a cold, draining emptiness. Yet outside his basement, fear festers. Lady Chadwick's music room is now shunned. Servants whisper of icy drafts near the chronovisor's corner, of faint sobs echoing after midnight. The stolen pendant is forgotten. The perceived haunting is the real scandal. Desperation, that uniquely Victorian cocktail of faith and frantic science, takes hold. Enter Professor Silas Throckmorton. Picture Throckmorton, less a scientist, more a walking advertisement for questionable electricity. Wiry, bespectacled, hair perpetually standing on end as if personally insulted by gravity, smelling faintly of singed wool and ammunition. He's a minor celebrity on the lecture circuit, demonstrating the wonders of galvanic fluid, making frogs' legs dance, making hair stand on end, his own being prime evidence. He'd recently wowed crowds at the 1888 International Electrical Exhibition in London, showcasing Tesla's AC wonders alongside his own dodgy vitality revitalizers. Hearing of Lady Chadwick's predicament, he sees his main chance. He proposes not an exorcism, but a scientific purification, a chronocatharsis. Mortlake, weary but morbidly curious, is reluctantly invited to observe. You step into Lady Chadwick's music room weeks after the fateful soiree. It's changed. The grand piano is shrouded. The lilies are dead. The chronovisor still ticks, but it feels like a predator pretending to sleep. And Throckmorton's apparatus? Imagine a spider on a caffeine binge weaving a web of copper wire. Thick cables snake across the Persian rug, connected to a groaning, steam-powered dynamo parked blasphemously in the rose garden. Bell jars, those glass domes normally preserving exotic butterflies or fancy desserts, stand inverted at strategic points. One over the chronovisor, others near cold spots reported by trembling maids. Wires sprout from them like metallic roots, connecting to brass rods driven into the floorboards. Throckmorton bustles, adjusting knobs, checking connections, muttering about counter-ectoplasmic frequencies and etheric drainage. The principle, dear lady, is elementary, Throckmorton declares, wiping oily hands on his already stained waistcoat. Spirits are residual electrical energy, yes, stagnant charge. We create a dynamic field, a veritable whirlpool of pure, wholesome electricity to flush the deleterious energies away. Think of it as a spiritual enema. Lady Chadwick, clutching a vinaigrette bottle of smelling salts, nods weakly. Mortlake stands silently near the door, his expression unreadable. Historians still argue whether these early haphazard electrical experiments paved the way for modern neurology or were just spectacularly dangerous parlor tricks. Throckmorton leaned heavily towards the latter. The obscure, slightly terrifying fact? Victorians used electric baths, whole-body immersions in charged water, to treat everything from hysteria to gout, sometimes with fatal results. Throckmorton's bell jar method was basically a targeted, high-stakes version for haunted real estate. Throckmorton gives the signal. The dynamo outside roars to life. The copper wires hum, vibrating visibly. A sharp, ozone-rich tang fills the room, overpowering the lingering beeswax. The gas lamps flicker wildly. Within the bell jar over the chronovisor, the air shimmers. The mercury globes inside the clock begin to tremble violently, not with spectral presence, but with the sheer physical vibration. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The rhythm becomes erratic, jarring.
Mortlake stiffens. This isn't detection. This is assault. "Observe the discharge," Throckmorton cries triumphantly, pointing to one of the other bell jars near a shadowed alcove. Within it, faint blue sparks crackle between the central brass rod and the glass. "Ectoplasmic residue! We're flushing it out!" Lady Chadwick gasps, half in awe, half in terror. Then the chronovisor stops. Its hands freeze solid. But this isn't the profound stillness of the soiree. This is the frozen scream of a machine pushed beyond its limits. The pendulum jams at an awkward angle. The delicate silver filament inside glows cherry red, then pings, snapping under the stress. Smoke, acrid and greasy, begins to curl from the clock's casing where the wires connect. "Professor?" Lady Chadwick's voice is a squeak. "Merely the expulsion intensifying," Throckmorton assures, frantically turning a dial. "The malignant energies resist eviction. More power." The dynamo outside shrieks in protest. The lights in the room surge blindingly bright, then plunge into near darkness. Sparks erupt from a junction box near the door. A footman yelps, dropping a tray with a spectacular crash. The bell jar over the chronovisor vibrates so violently its glass rim grinds against the wooden base. Crack! A hairline fracture appears. Then another. The ozone smell intensifies, mixed now with the stench of burning rubber insulation and melting solder. Mortlake lunges forward. "Stop it, you fool! You're destroying it!" Too late. With a sound like a pistol shot, the chronovisor's bell jar shatters. Shards of glass explode outwards. The mercury globes, already stressed, rupture simultaneously. Liquid silver sprays across the silk wallpaper, pooling on the floor like malevolent quicksilver. The clock's oak casing splits along a seam with a tortured groan. Smoke billows out in earnest. Someone screams. Throckmorton, trying to disconnect a sparking cable, receives a jolt that lifts him off his feet and deposits him unceremoniously on his backside, his hair now impressively vertical, wisps of smoke rising from his sleeves. The dynamo outside coughs, sputters, and dies with a final defeated wheeze. Darkness, thick and sudden, descends upon the room, broken only by the ghastly glowing embers where the chronovisor's filament had been, and the eerie reflective pools of spilled mercury catching the moonlight through the windows. Silence. Thick, choking silence, broken only by Throckmorton's dazed whimpering and the frantic rustle of Lady Chadwick's skirts as she flees the room. The purification attempt hasn't cleansed the house. It's baptized it in chaos, mercury, and the acrid stink of failed science. Mortlake stands amidst the wreckage, the glow from the broken filament reflecting in his wide, horrified eyes. His creation, his proof, his bridge to Ilara lies shattered. Not by skepticism, but by the desperate, flailing hubris of trying to electrocute the unseen. The chronovisor hadn't just stopped for a ghost. It had been murdered by a man wielding lightning like a toddler wields a hammer. And in the darkness, the cold spots feel colder than ever. The void, it seemed, didn't appreciate being fumigated.
The acrid stench of burnt wiring and spilled mercury hangs heavy in Lady Chadwick's ruined music room, a physical manifestation of shattered hopes and electrocuted hubris. You stand amidst the wreckage with Mortlake, the moonlight glinting coldly off the quicksilver pools on the floor, illuminating the fractured oak carcass of the chronovisor like a broken tombstone.
Throckmorton is helped away, twitching and muttering about unforeseen resistances, smelling faintly of singed eyebrows. Lady Chadwick flees to her country estate, reportedly requiring round-the-clock sedation and vowing never to return to that accursed pile. The chronovisor, once society's macabre darling, is now toxic. Not just physically, with its spilled mercury poison seeping into the floorboards, but reputationally. Mortlake becomes a pariah overnight. News of the disastrous chronocatharsis spreads through London faster than cholera. Forget Jack the Ripper for a moment. This is a scandal laced with science, ghosts, and high society hysterics. Tabloid gold. Newspapers, particularly the lurid penny dreadfuls, seize upon it. Headlines scream, "Electric exorcism explodes," and "Mercury madness in Mayfair." Punch magazine publishes a vicious cartoon, Mortlake depicted as a gaunt, wild-eyed wizard trying to harness lightning bolts, shooting from a comically oversized clock, while terrified aristocrats flee, their wigs standing on end. The once intriguing ghost detector is now painted as a dangerous folly, a machine that attracts calamity. Mortlake isn't a grieving genius. He's Phantom Phineas, the man who brought literal and figurative darkness into respectable homes. The obscure, darkly ironic fact: Victorian newspapers often reported on spontaneous human combustion with utter credulity, yet the possibility of a machine interacting with the unseen was deemed laughable madness. Ghost stories were fine, ghost science was blasphemy. The fear becomes palpable, metastasizing beyond Lady Chadwick's circle. Wealthy families who once clamored for chronovisor demonstrations now hire workmen to remove any suspicious electrical apparatus installed after Throckmorton's craze began. Rumors fly that the machine's destruction released trapped spirits, turning them vengeful. Servants quit en masse from houses where it had briefly resided, whispering of unnatural chills and objects moving in locked rooms. A minor baronet, Sir Humphrey Bletchley, who owned an early prototype Mortlake had sold in desperation, tries to have his buried in consecrated ground, only to be refused by a terrified vicar who declared it a vessel of infernal influence. The chronovisor's very idea becomes cursed. Historians still argue whether this panic was genuine spiritualist terror, a backlash against perceived scientific overreach, or simply the Victorian elite finding a scapegoat for their own Ripper-fueled anxieties. Was it fear of ghosts, or fear of the machine that dared to suggest ghosts were real and quantifiable? Mortlake retreats entirely. His workshop becomes a sealed crypt. He dismisses his single remaining apprentice, a wide-eyed lad more terrified of his master's hollow stare than any ghost. Inspector Thorne's investigation into the society burglaries stalls. Without the chronovisor as a focal point, the pattern dissolves into isolated incidents. Thorne, ever practical, suspects the thief simply moved on or found a new distraction. Mortlake doesn't care about snuff boxes anymore. He sits amidst the ruins of his life's work, salvaged gears, the cracked mainspring from the chronovisor, the glass rod that once held Ilara's hair, miraculously unbroken. The workshop air, thick with ozone and despair, feels heavier, colder. The gas lamps gutter constantly, as if starved of oxygen. He barely eats, existing on weak tea and the bitter taste of failure. Sleep is a memory. When he does doze at his bench, he's jolted awake by phantom sounds, the sharp crack of breaking glass, the sickening sizzle of the overloaded filament, and Throckmorton's idiotic cry for more power. And sometimes the faint, impossible sound of a child's laughter echoing just beyond the basement door. Is it Ilara? Or his mind finally fracturing under the weight? He becomes obsessed with the last reading, not the Chadwick soiree stop at 9:48 p.m., but the basement's own visitation, the moment that started it all. 3:17 a.m. That frozen pendulum, the spilled mercury, the impossible cold. He scrawls the time everywhere, on blueprint margins, on scraps of paper, etched into the workshop bench with a screwdriver. 3:17. It becomes his mantra, his prison. He dismantles the salvaged chronovisor components not to rebuild, but to understand that exact moment. What confluence of forces, what spectral fingerprint triggered the lock? He ignores the world outside. Ripper headlines pile up unread. Bills go unanswered. His world shrinks to the radius of a workbench lamp's pool of light, illuminating brass shards and the haunting numbers 3:17. He starts sketching designs not for a new detector, but for a repeater, a device that might recreate the specific electromagnetic conditions of that basement visitation, a temporal echo chamber. It's a descent into a different kind of madness, fueled not by hope, but by a desperate need to revisit the proof he lost, even if it means drowning in the void he tried to measure. The chronovisor's final, terrible legacy isn't haunted houses. It's the broken man in the basement, whispering to gears in the perpetual twilight, chasing the ghost of a ghost, and the frozen hands pointing to 3:17. Outside, London fears the Ripper's knife. Down here, Mortlake fears the silence that comes after the clock stops forever. And the chilling thought that perhaps, just perhaps, the chronovisor didn't break during Throckmorton's folly. Perhaps it simply succeeded one last time, detecting the arrival of something far more final than a phantom, despair, wearing its creator's face. The time, always 3:17.
The deep voice telling horror stories. The perpetual twilight of Mortlake's workshop deepens, thick with the smell of ozone, unwashed wool, and the metallic tang of despair. You sit beside him in that dim pool of gaslight, watching his trembling fingers trace the salvaged brass gears, his lips silently forming 3:17 like a broken prayer. But while the inventor sinks into his private abyss, the chronovisor's shattered legacy takes on a life of its own in the city above. Fear, once confined to Mayfair parlors, mutates and spreads through London's fog-choked streets like a psychic plague. The machine isn't just broken, it's become a cursed totem in the public imagination. Rumors slither out from servants' quarters and tavern back rooms. They say the chronovisor didn't just detect phantoms, it invited them. Whispers tell of sudden, inexplicable tragedies striking those associated with it. A footman who'd carried the clock at Lady Chadwick's, found dead in his garret room, face frozen in terror, no mark on him. The workman hired to scrape mercury-soaked wallpaper from the music room went mad overnight, babbling about silver snakes coiling in his veins, now confined to Bedlam. Even distant connections breed misfortune. A clerk who'd merely transcribed Throckmorton's lecture notes drowns in 3 inches of rainwater in a ditch. Coincidence? Perhaps, but in the shadow of Jack the Ripper's unseen knife and the lingering stench of the Great Stink, though the sewers were finally being fixed by Bazalgette's monumental project, the air still held the memory of decay. London is primed for superstition. The obscure, chilling fact, Victorians believed mirrors could trap the souls of the dying, leading to the widespread practice of covering them in a house after a death. Now people started covering clocks too, just in case. The chronovisor's activations, real or imagined, become linked to death omens. A stable boy swears he saw the ghostly outline of Mortlake's ruined clock hovering over Newgate Prison the night before a hanging. A costermonger claims the bells of St. Paul's chimed erratically, tick-tocking instead of ringing on the day a factory fire claimed 12 lives in the East End. The Ripper's atrocities provide a grim counterpoint. While Whitechapel fears a flesh and blood monster, the rest of London starts fearing an invisible one summoned by Mortlake's hubris. Punch magazine abandons satire for sensationalism. New cartoons show the chronovisor as a gaping maw in a clock face, spewing spectral tendrils that strangle sleeping citizens. Beware the ticking terror, screams a penny dreadful, hawked on street corners, its lurid cover depicting a skeletal hand emerging from a shattered clock face. Historians still argue whether this wave of supernatural dread was mass hysteria fueled by Ripper panic and social inequality, or a genuine cultural shift triggered by the chronovisor's audacious challenge to the natural order. Did Mortlake crack the veil, or just the city's collective nerve? The fear turns tangible, almost viral. Landlords refuse tenants who own grandfather clocks. Watchmakers report a slump in sales. People prefer unreliable pocket watches to the ominous tick-tock resonating through a quiet room. An absurd but deadly serious rumor circulates that winding a clock after midnight could attract chronophagic entities, time-eating ghosts. Even the city's stray dogs seem edgier, barking at shadows near places the chronovisor had once resided. The final grotesque twist: grave robbers, that is resurrection men, start reporting unnerving experiences. One, digging in a Highgate cemetery plot, swears his lantern flickered out and his pocket watch stopped dead at 3:17 a.m., the exact time of Mortlake's basement visitation. He fled, leaving his shovel behind, convinced the chronovisor's influence had seeped into the very soil, animating the corpses he sought to steal. It's not just the dead walking, mate, it's the time around them going rotten, he's reported, muttering in a dockside pub. The line between detection and attraction blurs into pure terror. The chronovisor hadn't just frozen its hands, it had frozen London's courage. Meanwhile, amidst this rising tide of dread, Mortlake is oblivious, trapped in his 3:17 obsession. He doesn't hear the city's whispers. He hears only the phantom echo of the chronovisor's final fatal tick before Throckmorton's folly shattered it, and the faint, desperate hope that if he can just recreate that moment, he might bridge the gap between his broken machine and the daughter he lost. The void isn't out there hunting Londoners. For Mortlake, it's right here,
sitting beside him at the workbench, reflected in the polished brass of a salvaged gear. The real horror isn't that the chronovisor attracted ghosts, it's that its destruction left a city believing in monsters it couldn't see or understand, while the man who built it chases a ghost only he believes in, death to the screams its creation unleashed. Tick-tock goes the fear, tick-tock goes the grief, and somewhere in the fog, Jack the Ripper moves unseen. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't summoned by clocks. They're just human.
The London fog thickens, heavy with coal smoke, Ripper dread, and the new, insidious fear of stopped clocks. But deep in Mortlake's basement, time is warped into a single, suffocating moment, 3:17 a.m. You watch him hunched over his bench, not sleeping, barely breathing, surrounded by the skeletal remains of the chronovisor. His fingers, stained black with oil and fatigue, reassemble components not into a functioning machine, but into a shrine to that frozen instant. He connects salvaged mercury tubes to Leyden jars, threads broken filament through cracked insulators, weaves a nest of wires humming with unstable current. It's not a ghost detector anymore. It's a seance device aimed at one specific point in the void. A machine built to scream, "Alara, are you there?" into the static of eternity. The air crackles, not just with electricity, but with the sharp, sour scent of a mind fraying at the edges. He mutters equations mixed with nursery rhymes, his eyes fixed on a salvaged clock face he's manually set to 3:17. The workshop feels less like a lab and more like the antechamber of a nervous breakdown. Outside, the world marks time differently. It's 1889. Queen Victoria, the very embodiment of an empire, remains shrouded in perpetual mourning for her beloved, Albert, dead nearly 30 years. Her court is a mausoleum of black crepe and stifled sighs. Osborne house retreats become prolonged vigils. She commissions statues, builds monuments, preserves his rooms exactly as he left them, a nation's grief ritualized on a monumental scale. Historians still argue whether this prolonged mourning was genuine devotion, psychological fixation, or a shrewd political performance reinforcing the stability of her reign. The obscure, poignant fact? Victoria had Albert's shaving water brought to her room every single morning until her own death, a ritual of absence as precise and unyielding as any clockwork. While Mortlake obsessed over a single time, Victoria obsessed over a single loss, freezing her empire in the amber of remembrance. Talk about setting the mood. Mortlake's own ritual reaches a crescendo on a rain-lashed night indistinguishable from the last 100. He's ready. His jury-rigged apparatus, let's call it the echo chamber, hums with a dangerous, unstable energy. Salvaged mercury bubbles weakly in cracked glass. Sparks spit from exposed connections. He checks the clock face. 3:15 a.m. 2 minutes. He takes a shuddering breath, fingers hovering over a crude switch made from a telegraph key and brass scrap. The gas lamps gutter wildly, casting leaping shadows that look like grasping hands on the workshop walls. Rain hammers the high window like frantic knuckles. Tick-tock, but there is no talk. Only the ragged sound of his own breathing and the sizzle of the overloaded circuit. 3:16, 1 minute. He whispers Alara's name, a dry rasp lost in the electrical whine. 3:17 a.m. He throws the switch. What happens next isn't a ghost story. It's a tragedy written in volts and desperation. The echo chamber doesn't detect a presence. It implodes. There's no grand spectral reveal, no whispered child's voice. Instead, a blinding blue-white arc of electricity erupts from the central junction, lashing out like an angry serpent. It strikes the main Leyden jar cluster. Glass explodes, shrapnel whistles through the air. The pooled mercury on the floor, agitated by the current, erupts, not physically, but in a terrifyingly beautiful, silent plume of shimmering silver vapor that instantly fills the room's lower half. Mortlake is thrown backward by the concussion, crashing into a shelf of delicate chronometer parts. The gas lamps snuff out simultaneously. Darkness, absolute and thick, swallows the workshop, pierced only by the fading, sizzling embers of the destroyed apparatus and the unholy, ethereal glow of the mercury mist swirling knee-high, catching the faint moonlight like liquid specters. Silence. Then, a wet, ragged cough from where Mortlake fell. The mercury mist slowly settles, coating everything in a dull, toxic sheen. He doesn't move. When his landlord, alarmed by the explosion-like sound and the sudden darkness in the usually lit basement, forces the door open at dawn, he finds Mortlake slumped against the shattered shelf. His eyes are open, wide and unseeing, fixed on the salvaged clock face lying nearby. Its hands, miraculously undisturbed, still point to 3:17. There's no obvious fatal wound, no sign of electrocution, beyond minor scorching on his clothes. The official verdict, delivered by a hurried coroner amidst the Ripper inquests and cholera scares: epilepsy, likely induced by overexertion and exposure to noxious fumes. A convenient, quiet end for an inconvenient man. The obscure, grim footnote: Victorian coroners often blamed epilepsy, stroke, for sudden, unexplained deaths, especially when the deceased was considered eccentric or the cause was medically awkward. Mercury poisoning? Nervous exhaustion? A heart broken one too many times? Easier to write epilepsy and move on. The workshop is sealed like a tomb. Authorities, wary of the mercury contamination and the building's now toxic reputation, brick up the basement entrance. Mortlake's few salvaged possessions, notebooks filled with frantic equations and sketches, the salvaged 317 clock face, odd brass components, are boxed haphazardly and vanish into the labyrinthine storage of the minor auction house, destined for obscurity. And the remnants of the chronovisor itself, the shattered oak case, the ruptured mercury reservoirs, the gears fused together by Throckmorton's folly, gone. Vanished as if the void Mortlake tried to measure finally reached out and reclaimed its own. No inventory lists them. No workman admits to removing them. They simply cease to exist in the record. All that remains is the legend, the cursed clock, Phantom Phineas, the ticking terror. Mortlake's final frozen moment becomes his epitaph, whispered in taverns and drawing rooms alike. He stopped at 3:17. Queen Victoria mourned Albert with statues. London mourned Mortlake with ghost stories. Both were monuments to loss, one draped in imperial velvet, the other speared in quicksilver and fear. The chronovisor wasn't just broken, it was erased, leaving only an echo of its frozen hands and the chilling question: did Mortlake find Alara in that final catastrophic spark? Or did he simply build a bridge the void decided to cross?
Decades bleed past. Queen Victoria's mourning gives way to Edwardian frivolity, shattered by the Great War's thunder. The roaring 20s wail, then crush into the grey despair of the 30s. Another war engulfs the world, leaving London scarred but standing, patched with concrete and ration book resilience. Ripper tales fade into history books. Throckmorton's name is forgotten, a dusty footnote in the annals of bad science. Mortlake? He's become a ghost story himself, whispered as Phantom Phineas, only in obscure occult circles, or as a macabre punchline. What time is it? Time you stopped asking lest you end up like old Mortlake. His workshop basement, bricked up and deemed toxic, is buried under new foundations, a forgotten secret beneath post-war reconstruction. The chronovisor isn't just broken, it's myth. Until you stand in 1953, not the gaslit gloom of Mortlake's London, but the dusty, sun-speckled silence of a derelict attic in Bloomsbury. Rain patters softly on the slanted roof. The air tastes of dry rot, pigeon droppings, and the peculiar melancholy of abandoned things. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, slants through a grimy dormer window, illuminating floating particles like suspended time. Two workmen, Bert and Alf, are clearing out the attic of a crumbling Georgian townhouse slated for demolition. They're men of practical concerns, rebuilding a broken city, not chasing broken ghosts. Bert pries open a rotting tea chest, overflowing with moth-eaten velvet curtains. Alf wrestles a heavy, canvas-draped object out from under the eaves, grunting with the effort. "Blimey, Alf, what's this? Feels like lead-loin coffin," Bert wheezes, brushing cobwebs from his cap. "I dunno, some old landlord's junk probably," Alf mutters, dropping his end with a thud that shakes the floorboards. A cloud of grey dust erupts, catching the sunlight. He coughs, pulling at the stiff, mildewed canvas. It rips, revealing dark, scarred oak beneath. Not a coffin, a cabinet. Tall, rectangular, unnervingly familiar in its proportions, though battered and missing its glass front. Bert squints, wiping dust from the exposed face. Brass numerals, tarnished almost black. Twin empty sockets where something spherical once sat. And the hands, frozen, utterly, completely still, not broken, not jammed, just stopped. Bert traces the brass minute hand with a calloused finger. Stuck fast. Must have seized up donkeys years ago. He tries to gently nudge the hour hand. It doesn't budge a fraction. Core, look at the time! 3:15! Must have stopped in the night, eh? He chuckles, a dry sound in the quiet. Hope the poor sod wasn't waiting for his alarm. Alf isn't laughing. He's staring at the face, a frown deepening the lines on his weathered face. 3:15? Exactly? His voice is low. He steps closer, peering at the small brass plaque screwed below the numeral XIV. The tarnish is thick, but the engraved letters are still faintly visible. Mortlake Chronovisor. Patent pending. Alf's blood runs cold. He grew up in these streets. His nan, God rest her, used to scare him stiff with tales of Phantom Phineas and his cursed clock that stopped for phantoms and brought doom on anyone who touched it. She'd always ended with that chilling whisper, "He stopped at 3:17. "But," Alf's voice is a rasp, "I know this thing. We need to leave it now." He backs away, crossing himself instinctively. Bert scoffs, knocking his knuckles against the oak. "Don't be daft, Alf. It's just some old museum piece. Worth a few bob, maybe, if we clean it up." He grabs a crowbar from his tool belt. "Let's see what's inside this old—" "No!" Alf's shout echoes in the cramped space, startling a pigeon into frantic flight outside the window. Dust drifts down from the rafters. The air suddenly feels colder. The dust motes hang heavier. That persistent drip of rain outside sounds unnaturally loud. Plink, 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 like a slow, steady countdown. He remembers the stories now, vague echoes from pub talk, the Mayfair disaster, the stolen treasures, the deaths, Phantom Phineas dying in his workshop. He stopped at 3:17. "All right, Alfie, keep your air on," Bert mutters, trying to sound nonchalant but failing. He eyes the frozen hands. 3:15, 3:15. But what if it was... He shivers, though the attic isn't cold. Maybe we just cover it back up. Let the demolition lads deal with it tomorrow. He grabs the torn canvas, eager to hide the accusing stillness of those hands.
Alf nods vigorously, relief washing over him. Yeah, cover it, quick! He helps Bert drag the stiff canvas back over the cabinet, shrouding the dark wood and the eternally frozen hands. They work fast, sweat beading on their foreheads despite the chill. As the last corner of the chronovisor is covered, a sudden sharp crack echoes through the attic. A roof tile slipping or a timber settling. Both men jump, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They share a look of pure, superstitious dread. Without another word, they abandon their tools and scramble down the rickety attic ladder, slamming the trapdoor shut behind them as if sealing a tomb. Below, the empty house groans, settling into its own forgotten bones. Above, shrouded in dusty canvas, the chronovisor remains, silent, still, waiting. The hands haven't moved. 3:15 p.m.? Or is it holding its breath at 3:17 a.m., a century after its creator's final, desperate gasp? The demolition crew arrives tomorrow. Will the wrecking ball be the end, or just another chapter for a clock that refuses to let time or terror rest? The void, it seems, has excellent storage and a long memory.
The attic dust settles over the shrouded chronovisor like a final sigh. Bert and Alf flee, their superstitions tattooed onto their pounding hearts. But demolition crews aren't paid for fear, they're paid for wreckage. The next morning, sunlight glares through the now open roof as a bulldozer's growl shakes the Bloomsbury street. Workmen swarm the doomed housetown, reducing Victoriana to splinters and plaster dust. The canvas-covered cabinet in the attic? Just another obstacle. A burly foreman, Stan, hauls it out with a grunt, heavy old based, probably full of lead weights. He shrugs, tossing it onto the salvage pile destined for Grimshaw's Antique Emporium, a cluttered Aladdin's cave of chipped porcelain, rusty swords, and mysterious items sold as seen. Grimshaw, a man whose eyebrows look like startled caterpillars, peers at the plaque. Mortlake Chronovisor, patent pending. His eyes gleam, not with dread, but pound signs. Aho! The ghost clock, capital. He slaps a tag on it. Rare curio, Victorian spiritualist apparatus, eccentric provenance, sold as seen. And just like that, Mortlake's shattered dream becomes a 50-pound curiosity, wheeled into a dim corner beside a stuffed badger wearing a tiny hat. Irony's a bitter pill, Wanderer. Sometimes cursed relics end up next to taxidermy in fancy dress. Fast forward 5 years. It's 1958. The world vibrates with a new kind of tension, the metallic thrum of the Cold War. Sputnik's lonely beep-beep echoes from orbit, a stark reminder of science's terrifying potential. Yet down here, in a cluttered university laboratory smelling of ozone and old paper, a different relic is getting a second look. Enter Dr. Evelyn Shaw, physicist. Think sensible tweed, hair in a ruthless bun, eyes that miss nothing. Beside her, Dr. Leo Finch, psychologist, leans against a bench, radiating skeptical charm like aftershave. They've convinced Grimshaw to loan them the chronovisor for non-invasive analysis. It sits on a steel table now, stripped of its shroud, bathed in the harsh fluorescent glare of modern inquiry. Its scars are laid bare, the split oak casing, the empty mercury sockets, the snapped pendulum, the hands eternally frozen at 3:15, or is it 3:17? The ambiguity lingers like cheap perfume. Right then, Leo.
Evelyn says, snapping on latex gloves with surgical precision. Let's see if we can exercise the ghost stories with a multimeter. Evelyn's approach is methodical. She maps residual electromagnetic fields around the cabinet, probing with sensors. See these fluctuations? She points to a flickering oscilloscope readout. Inconsistent, weak, but present. Could be residual charge from old Leyden jars, or just London's ambient EM soup. She taps the cracked oak. Mortlake lined this with vulcanized rubber, rudimentary EM shielding, clever for his time, but flawed. A strong enough field could disrupt sensitive mechanisms, maybe trigger that locking latch he built. Leo chuckles, swirling lukewarm coffee. So ghosts are just dodgy wiring giving clocks indigestion. Explains why my Aunt Mabel's standard lamp always flickered when she argued with Uncle Bert about ghosts. Evelyn shoots him a look drier than the Sahara. We're quantifying anomalies, Leo, not diagnosing domestic spats. Leo's angle, the human factor. He pores over Mortlake's surviving notes, frantic scribbles about Alara, the 317 obsession, the society panic. Mass suggestion, Evelyn, he declares. Powerful stuff. Remember the War of the Worlds radio broadcast in '38? Panicked a nation because people believed it. Mortlake's grief made him hypersensitive. His high society guinea pigs primed for spectral drama by Ripper Terror and Too Much Claret. Throckmorton's electrocution party was pure theatre, expectation amplified into perceived phenomena. That Mercury Lady Chadwick saw churning, probably just vibrations from his ridiculous dynamo. He leans closer to the frozen clock face. And this, stop time, the ultimate blank canvas. People see what they fear, always have. Historians still argue whether Mortlake was a pioneer or a cautionary tale about confirmation bias warping observation. Finch firmly votes for the latter. Then Evelyn introduces the obscure, chillingly plausible culprit, infrasound. Low-frequency sound waves, she explains, adjusting a speaker aimed at the chronovisor. Below 20 hertz, we can't hear it, but we feel it. Causes disorientation, dread, even visual hallucinations, like seeing phantom shapes or feeling an icy presence. She plays a recording, a deep, subsonic thrum that vibrates your fillings. The air in the lab feels suddenly heavier, colder. A loose screw on the table rattles ominously. Right, so Mortlake's phantom chills were just Victorian London's collective tammy ramblin'. Explains why ghost stories thrive near train tracks. Evelyn nods grimly. Infrasound could explain the physiological symptoms reported. Nausea, dread, the churning mercury if it vibrated sympathetically. Mortlake might have built a very elaborate, very accidental infrasound detector. The idea hangs there. The void's whisper might just be bad plumbing in the fabric of reality. They debate late into the evening, the chronovisor a silent, scarred witness. EM fields, plausible interference. Infrasound, a masterful unseen puppeteer. Mass hysteria, undeniably potent. Each theory slices away a layer of the supernatural, leaving a core of brass, wood, and human frailty. Yet, Evelyn runs her gloved finger over the frozen minute hand. It's jammed, not by rust, but by a tiny, intricate latch mechanism. The one Mortlake designed to engage only when mercury and filament reacted. It's perfectly intact, undamaged by Throckmorton's blast or time. She can't replicate the exact conditions that triggered it. The precise confluence of factors, imagined or real, remains elusive. Science dissects the corpse of the legend, but the ghost of why it worked for Mortlake lingers. The chronovisor, battered and silent, resists final judgment. It's less a ghost detector now, more a mirror reflecting our own desperate need to explain the shivers down our spines. Was Mortlake measuring phantoms, faulty physics, or the terrifying power of a broken heart amplified by an era drowning in fear? The lab lights hum. The answer, like the void, remains stubbornly out of reach. And the hands? Still frozen, still pointing, still asking.
Dr. Shaw's oscilloscope flickers off, the subsonic thrum fades, and the lab's fluorescent hum reasserts itself. Harsh, sterile, grounding. Yet the chronovisor's silent presence feels heavier now. Its frozen hands less like a mechanical failure and more like an accusation. Evelyn peels off her gloves with a sigh that hangs in the air like dust. Leon drains his cold coffee, the grimace on his face not just from the taste. You stand with them, Wanderer, staring at the scarred oak cabinet. The science is compelling. EM interference, infrasound, mass hysteria, a neat dissection of Victorian superstition. But the implication? If Mortlake's mad contraption did work, even by accident, what does that mean? Not just about ghosts, but about the very fabric of reality we stitch our lives onto. You lean closer, tracing the frozen minute hand with your gaze. If the chronovisor detected something, a ripple in the electromagnetic field, a subsonic tremor echoing through the walls of existence, a psychic residual clinging like cobwebs, what does that reveal? That the universe isn't the clean clockwork mechanism Newton imagined? That it's porous? Leaky? Filled with invisible currents and unseen tenants brushing past us in the dark? The thought is vertiginous. It makes the familiar walls of your room feel thin as rice paper. Imagine tuning your radio and catching not static, but the faint, fading sigh of someone long gone. Mortlake didn't just build a clock, he might have built a periscope peering into the basement of reality where things we don't understand, and maybe can't understand, scuttle in the shadows. Historians still argue whether Victorian science was on the cusp of discovering quantum weirdness or was just spectacularly good at misinterpreting drafts. Mortlake's mercury might have been shivering at the quantum foam. This isn't just Victorian fancy. Fast forward to now, we live in the age of the neutrino, particles that pass through the entire Earth like it's not even there. We map dark matter by the gravitational holes it leaves in the cosmos. We know 95% of the universe is invisible, undetectable by ordinary means. Mortlake's chronovisor, in its clumsy whale oil and hope way, was groping towards that same terrifying truth. Most of what exists is hidden from us. His phantoms might have been dark matter hiccups, quantum entanglements leaking into macro scale, or something else entirely. The obscure, mind-bending fact, some interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the controversial many worlds theory, suggest every possible outcome of every event actually happens, creating infinite branching realities. Is the chronovisor a crude receiver occasionally picking up static from the universe next door? Cheer up, you mutter. At least in one reality, Throckmorton didn't blow it up. Probably. The Cold War context of its rediscovery chills this thought further. 1958. Mutually assured destruction hangs over everything like Damocles' sword. The invisible threat isn't ghosts. It's radiation, fallout, the silent creep of communism, spies whispering secrets in the dark. Just as Victorians feared the unseen knife of Jack the Ripper and the intangible chill of a phantom, Cold War citizens feared invisible particles poisoning their milk and ideologies poisoning their minds. Mortlake's clock becomes a stark metaphor. We're always surrounded by forces we can't see, threats we can barely comprehend, relying on crude detectors, Geiger counters, intelligence reports, our own flawed senses to warn us. The chronovisor didn't invent fear of the unseen. It just gave it brass gears and a face.
and a habit of stopping at inconvenient times. Bad enough the Soviets might nuke us. Now I gotta worry my grandma's mantle clock is judging the spectral real estate value, you quip. Dr. Finch breaks the heavy silence. "So, Evelyn," he says, forcing lightness into his voice, "do we file it under elaborate psychological trigger or proto-quantum anomaly detector?" He gestures at the chronovisor. "Either way, it's a monument to human ingenuity. Or desperation. Probably both." Evelyn doesn't smile. Her finger rests near the snapped silver filament, the one laced with Ilara's hair. "It's the intentionality, Leo. More like wanted it to detect something specific. Grief as a tuning fork. What if consciousness can interact with these hidden layers? Not control them, but resonate, attract attention." The lab suddenly feels colder. Is the void passive or observant? Did Mortlake's desperate love for Ilara act like a beacon in the dark, drawing something to the Mercury's shiver? And if so, what else might be listening when we pour our hearts into the emptiness? You step back from the table. The implications sprawl like spilled mercury. If the chronovisor worked, it shatters comfortable assumptions. Death isn't an off switch. It might be a transition into frequencies we can't perceive. Time isn't a river. It might be an ocean with treacherous currents and hidden depths. Reality isn't a salad stage. It's a thin ice sheet over fathomless, unseen waters. Mortlake's frozen hands aren't just marking 317. They're pointing at the terrifying fragility of everything we think we know. Science dissected the clock, but the question it embodies remains, ticking silently in the back of your mind. What else is sharing this space with us just beyond the edge of perception, waiting for the right or wrong machine or moment or yearning to make itself known? The fluorescent lights buzz. The chronovisor is silent. But the void it tried to measure, it feels very, very loud and very, very close.
The implications hang in the lab's sterile air, thick as the ozone after one of Mortlake's experiments. If the chronovisor did work, even as a crude, accidental antenna picking up static from reality's basement, what does that say about the walls of the world? You feel the ground beneath your own feet grow subtly less solid. That familiar coffee mug on your desk? Maybe it's vibrating at frequencies, humming with echoes of things long gone, or pulsing with energies bleeding in from dimensions where Throckmorton didn't blow everything up. Mortlake's grief didn't just build a clock. It might have sketched a terrifying blueprint of existence, layered, porous, and teeming with unseen currents. Forget haunted houses, the whole universe might be one. "Cheer up," you murmur, tapping your own wristwatch. "At least this one just tells me I'm late for dinner." Probably. Consider the world the chronovisor re-entered. 1958 bleeds into the tense early 60s. While Shaw and Finch debate infrasound and EM fields in their lab, the planet holds its breath over Cuba. October 1962, Soviet missiles pointed at Florida, American warships blockading the island. 13 days where the unseen threat wasn't spectral, but nuclear. Annihilation broadcast on crackling radio waves, mapped on situation room tables. A sword of Damocles forged from uranium and ideology. Kennedy and Khrushchev stare across the void, not of death, but of mutually assured destruction. The terror is palpable, invisible, carried on the airwaves. Just as Victorians felt Jack the Ripper's presence in every fog-shrouded alley, Cold War citizens felt the bomb's shadow in every sunrise. The chronovisor, rediscovered amidst this, feels less like a relic and more like a grim omen. Humanity has always been surrounded by forces it can't see, threats it barely comprehends. Mortlake's Mercury shivered,
Geiger counters clicked. Different detectors, same primal dread. Historians still argue whether the Cuban Missile Crisis was a near miss with extinction or a masterful game of brinkmanship, but the chilling truth remains: the unseen almost won. And speaking of unseen forces tinkering with minds, enter Project MK Ultra. While Mortlake used Alara's hair and a filament, the CIA was funding far darker experiments. Imagine basement labs where unsuspecting subjects, prisoners, addicts, mental patients, were dosed with LSD, subjected to sensory deprivation, hypnosis, and electroshock, all in a grotesque attempt to master mind control. The obscure, horrifying fact: one MK Ultra sub-project, Operation Midnight Climax, involved dosing men in safe houses with LSD and observing their reactions through one-way mirrors, often with prostitutes hired to lure them. It was real-world mesmerism gone feral, a government-sanctioned Throckmorton electrocuting souls instead of parlors. Talk about bad vibes. Mortlake wanted to talk to ghosts. MK Ultra wanted to make them. Remind me never to time travel to 1959 without a psychic umbrella. This is the legacy the chronovisor forces us to confront. If Mortlake's device registered something, be it infrasound, quantum leakage, or the psychic residue of profound grief, it shatters the illusion of a passive mechanical universe. It suggests reality is participatory. Consciousness, messy, yearning, terrified consciousness like Mortlake's, might not just observe the hidden layers, it might interact with them, tune them, attract them. His grief was the antenna. What frequencies does rage broadcast, or collective fear, or heaven help us, blind ideology? The chronovisor becomes a stark metaphor for the human condition. We are crude receivers, adrift in a cosmic ocean teeming with signals we barely understand, broadcasting our own messy static into the depths. So next time you get a weird chill, you joke, your voice tight. Maybe it's not the AC. Maybe it's your existential dread tuning into Radio Void. Request lines always open. Academics wrestle with this too. Historians still argue whether consciousness creates reality or merely perceives an objective one. The chronovisor, if it functioned, throws a wrench into both. It implies a third option. Consciousness resonates with hidden aspects of a pre-existing, complex reality. Mortlake's focused grief might have been a tuning fork vibrating in sympathy with something in the fabric of things. This isn't magic, it's terrifying physics. String theory suggests vibrating filaments composing reality. Could intense human emotion generate a similar, detectable vibration on scales we're only beginning to imagine? Did Alara's hair, sealed in glass, act as a quantum entanglement link to wherever her consciousness went? The questions spiral, vertiginous and profound. The chronovisor wasn't just detecting phantoms, it was probing the terrifying possibility that we are the ghosts in the machine, broadcasting our pain, love, and fear into a universe that might be listening and responding. That cold spot in your hallway? Maybe it's not Granny Mildred. Maybe it's the echo of your own unresolved anger, vibrating at a frequency that makes the local dark matter flinch. Comforting thought, you sigh, past the existential duct tape.
The implications for death itself are staggering. If Mortlake's device registered a presence linked to Alara, it suggests consciousness isn't extinguished, it transitions, it leaks. It lingers on frequencies our ordinary senses and even most of our instruments can't pick up. Death isn't an end. It might be a shift to a channel we can't access without a very specific, grief-tuned receiver.
Mortlake might have died chasing a ghost, but his machine whispers that he might have been on the right track. A track paved with mercury, madness, and the terrifying fragility of everything we think we know. The chronovisor's frozen hands don't just mark 317. They point to the abyss beneath the thin ice of our perception. And the scariest part? The ice is cracking. All the time. Everywhere. The void isn't empty. It's crowded. And thanks to Phantom Phineas and his impossible clock, we now have to wonder, what's tuning in to us? You stare into the chronovisor's frozen face, its hands eternally accusing the void. If Mortlake's creation did work, even as a cracked lens into reality's basement, its legacy isn't haunted antiques. It's a seismic crack in the foundation of everything. The comfortable certainty of solid walls, predictable time, and a universe indifferent to our whispers, gone. Replaced by a terrifying, humming potential that the unseen isn't just out there, it's in here. Woven into the fabric of your morning coffee, your flickering Wi-Fi signal, the cold spot on the stairs you blame on the AC. Cheer up, you murmur, eyeing your own innocuous digital clock. At least this one doesn't judge my life choices, probably. Consider our modern world. We're drowning in detectors far more sophisticated than Mortlake's whale oil contraption. LIGO listens for gravitational waves, ripples in space-time from colliding black holes a billion light-years away. Particle colliders smash atoms, hunting Higgs bosons in showers of subatomic confetti. We map the cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang itself. We're all Mortlakes now, building colossal machines to eavesdrop on the universe's hidden frequencies. The obscure, chilling fact: the Large Hadron Collider generates temperatures 100,000 times hotter than the sun's core in a tunnel under Switzerland. Mortlake's mercury shivered. We recreate the birth of the universe in steel tubes. Progress? Or just bigger, shinier ghost detectors? Next time your phone glitches, maybe it's not a software bug. Maybe it's a dark matter hiccup, or Granny Mildred trying to FaceTime from the void. Decline call. Yet, despite our tech, mysteries persist. Take the Voynich manuscript, that baffling 15th century book filled with unreadable script and bizarre botanical illustrations. Carbon-dated, scanned, code-cracked by AI, and still utterly indecipherable. Is it an elaborate hoax? A lost language? An alien plant catalog? Historians still argue whether it's a masterpiece of nonsense or a genuine cipher hiding profound secrets. It's a paper chronovisor, whispering of knowledge just beyond our grasp. Mortlake chased ghosts. We chase meaning in cryptic ink. Same desperation, fancier tools. At least Mortlake knew what he was looking for. Ilara. We're just yelling hello into the static of a 600-year-old meme. Then there's the chilling flip side, when the unseen forces itself into view. January 28, 1986. The Space Shuttle Challenger lifts off into a clear Florida sky. 73 seconds later, it disintegrates. Not because of ghosts, but because of a hidden, mundane flaw, a frozen O-ring seal in the solid rocket booster. Technology,
pushed to its limits, revealed a lethal vulnerability no one wanted to see. The unseen wasn't a phantom, it was physics ignored. A brutal reminder that reality's hidden layers aren't always esoteric energies. Sometimes they're cold, hard failure, waiting for the right conditions to explode. Mortlake's clock stopped. Challenger fell. Different scales, same terrifying lesson. The universe doesn't care about our plans. Its hidden currents can freeze O-rings or jam clockwork designed to measure grief. This is the chronovisor's unsettling legacy. If it functioned, it drags us kicking and screaming into a terrifying philosophical arena. Are we just biological Mortlake clocks? Complex mechanisms broadcasting our fears, loves, and rages into a cosmos teeming with unseen entities or forces that might be listening, resonating, responding? The academic debate rages. Is consciousness a localized fluke? Materialism? The foundation of reality? Idealism or panpsychism? Or something in between, a resonant phenomenon interacting with hidden fields? Mortlake's frozen hands point toward the latter. His grief wasn't just a feeling. It might have been a tuning fork vibrating in a universe filled with sympathetic strings. So next time you feel inexplicably sad, maybe it's not your brain chemistry. Maybe you're picking up a cosmic broadcast of existential dread. Tune in at 3:17 a.m. for The Void's Top 10 Sorrows. The implications are paralyzingly beautiful and horrifying. Death might be a transition, not an end. Time might be a vast ocean, not a river. Reality might be a thin film over depths we can't fathom. And we're not just observers, we're participants, broadcasters, receivers, walking, talking chronovisors, our emotions potentially sending ripples into the unseen, our senses occasionally picking up whispers from the static. Mortlake's scarred oak cabinet isn't just a relic, it's a mirror reflecting our own profound ignorance and terrifying potential. We built LIGO to hear black holes collide. What if something out there built a detector to hear us? The void isn't empty, it's watching. And thanks to a broken clock and a broken man, we can never unknow it. The hands point, the question remains. What frequency are you broadcasting on? And who or what is tuning in?
You hold the chronovisor now, Wanderer. Not the scarred oak relic, but its ghost. Its weight settles in your mind. A century of grief, mercury spills, and frozen hands pointing at 3:17. It's silent, yet it screams the eternal human question. What lies beyond the veil? We've dissected its gears, debated infrasound, and pondered quantum static. But the real horror isn't in the machine, it's in us. That gnawing need to prove the unprovable, to hammer brass and hope into a key for locked doors best left closed. Mortlake didn't just build a clock, he built a confessional booth for humanity's oldest terror, that we're not alone in the dark, and what shares the shadows isn't friendly. Look around, we're still at it. The Large Hadron Collider isn't just smashing particles, it's our modern chronovisor, hunting dark matter like Mortlake hunted phantoms. Same desperation, bigger budget. At least CERN hasn't electrocuted a Mayfair matron yet, you mutter. Give 'em time.
We launch telescopes like James Webb into the void, scanning cosmic background radiation for whispers of the Big Bang, a scientific seance for creation itself. Historians still argue whether this relentless probing stems from noble curiosity or a species-wide panic attack about our cosmic insignificance. Are we explorers or just ants building a lighthouse to fend off the abyss? The obscure, deliciously odd fact: Victorians had their own internet of haunted things. They called it crisis apparitions, dying loved ones appearing to relatives miles away at the exact moment of death. No clock needed, just raw psychic desperation punching through space-time like a telegram from the void. The Society for Psychical Research documented thousands of cases. Flawed? Absolutely. But proof we've always screamed into the silence, hoping for an echo. Mortlake's mercury was just fancier ink for the same message. Are you there? Now consider this. Every object holds potential terror. A child's doll isn't just porcelain and yarn. It's a vessel for projected innocence or imagined malice. A grandfather clock in a hallway isn't telling time. It's a metronome counting down to mortality. The chronovisor's true power? It holds up a mirror. Its frozen hands reflect our frozen fears, grief, regret, the chilling suspicion that death is a door, not a wall, and behind it, something watching, waiting. Hence why I stick to digital watches, you joke, voice tight. Fewer existential implications, also alarms for pizza. Academics call this the agency detection hypothesis. Our brains evolved to see patterns and intent everywhere. Rustling grass, tiger. Stopped clock, ghost. It kept ancestors alive. Now it fuels ghost tours and quantum theories. Is it a cognitive glitch or evolutionary foresight? Mortlake would have voted for foresight. His stopped clock wasn't malfunction. It was validation, a cosmic tiger in the Victorian fog. We end where we began, with longing, not for Ilara, but for answers. The chronovisor's legacy is the ache it leaves, a phantom limb of curiosity. We digitize seances now. Hello, Spirit Box apps. Scan haunted houses with thermal cameras and tweet about shadow people. The tools change, the terror doesn't. Because deep down, we want the void to answer. Even if it hisses, even if it freezes clocks and stops hearts. The alternative, absolute eternal silence, is the real horror. Mortlake knew it. You feel it now, holding this silent story. The clock is gone. The question remains, ticking in your bones. What if the dark isn't empty? What if it's crowded? And what if next time your own watch stutters, it's not the battery?
The candle flickers low now, wanderers, casting long, dancing shadows that sway like weary sentinels. Breathe deep. That scent of wax and old paper, it's the smell of stories settling, not gone, just resting. The chronovisor's hands are still, its mercury long spilled, but the night feels softer somehow. Less a predator in the dark, more a curious neighbor peeking through the fence. Remember, Mortlake's terror birthed wonder.
His broken machine reminds us that seeking answers isn't weakness, it's courage. The world remains gloriously, stubbornly mysterious, and that's all right. Stars still burn beyond the fog. Your coffee mug sits solid on the desk. The walls? Reassuringly thick. Mostly. We've walked haunted streets tonight, but dawn always comes. Blow out your candle. Let the embers fade. The journal closes with a soft sigh, its secrets safe until next we wander. The void can keep its whispers for now. Sleep well, dream of clockwork and starlight, not frozen hands. You're rooted here in the warm, ordinary magic of breath and heartbeat. The rest, well, that's a tale for another night. Rest easy, wanderers. The shadows can wait.